What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Geek Pantheon. I am Eric, and today I want to talk to you all about building interesting taverns. So many games of tabletop role-playing games start in a tavern, or you frequently visit a tavern, or your base of operations starts off as a tavern. Taverns and inns and restaurants and food and drink are such an integral part of this hobby and the types of stories that we tell, but more often than not, we don't give the amount of attention to detail and thoughtfulness to these establishments that I feel like we should to make them memorable and lasting. You even go back to I would say, genesis of the genre that spawned this hobby, Lord of the Rings, and you have, over the course of Fellowship of the Ring, two iconic taverns whose names still last to this day: the Green Dragon and the Prancing Pony. So I want to break down my method for creating unique and interesting taverns that your players will find memorable and enjoyable, like I do on my actual play podcast, Eberron Renewed. Link down below. If you want to see some real world examples of the things I'm going to talk about, episodes 145 and 146 back-to-back feature two distinct taverns set in the Eberron campaign setting, both set in the city of Sharn, but two very different from a cultural standpoint taverns. So the first thing I'm going to discuss is designing the memorable tavern itself, the physical structure that this tavern is. So first thing you want to talk about is the location and the ambiance of the tavern. Where is your tavern set, and what ambiance is it trying to evoke? If it's set in a little village in the middle of the forest, then obviously it's going to be built out of a lot of wood and maybe a thatched roof, things like that, that iconic medieval European style tavern that we think about. But if you're dealing with a dwarven culture that lives in the mountains, why in the world would their tavern be built out of wood and a thatched roof? Wouldn't it be carved into the side of a mountain, hewn from stone, and have that iconic dwarven architecture of the sharp angles and the lines and all that kind of stuff? Just like a elven tavern set in a lush forest might be built into a tree. Thinking about how you can make the tavern visually stand out based on its location and the ambiance that it's trying to go for. Because, and we'll get into this in a little bit, when you start having a fantasy world where the cultural lines are not hard drawn, where the elves live here and the dwarves live here, but rather you have these nations where cultural mixing has gone on. If you think about this initially, what do taverns look like for a culture? Then when those cultures start swapping places and mixing together, you can think of some interesting ways to create a unique tavern that are elves that find themselves living in a dwarven region, things like that. And then once you think about the location and ambiance, you want to think about what unique features this specific tavern has. If every tavern in every village in the woods is made of wood with a thatched roof, then what makes that tavern special other than the quirky name that you came up with? Is the proprietor a practitioner of the magical arts? And so rather than having sconces on the wall holding lanterns or whatever, the candles just float in the air around the tavern on a patrol, keeping everything well lit as they move around. Or is the owner an artificer? And so they've built automatons to serve drinks and carry things out to people's tables. Those little touches can make these places really memorable. And get creative and think outside the box. If it's a tavern that has been passed down generation after generation in the same family, maybe the ghosts of the previous owners and bartenders still live in the tavern and they help out and make drinks and carry plates around or bus tables, but you maybe see the poltergeist or you just see the stuff floating around because it's ghosts. Or go Beauty and the Beast with it. Maybe all the furniture is sentient and so it can talk to the guests, and that could be a really fun, memorable experience in a tavern for your player. And then think about the tavern's backstory. I referenced on this with the unique features about being passed down generation after generation, or is this a relatively new tavern that an ex-adventurer started up as their retirement plan, and what kind of stories do they have to tell? How did this tavern come to exist here in this moment at this time, and how has its backstory informed where it is now? Do you have a situation where the tavern has been passed generation after generation, but the current owner thinks that the old way of doing things is inefficient and stuffy, and so they think that they can reinvent the wheel, and so the long-standing patrons are actually grumpy because rather than having a vibrant waitstaff that the owner employs from the town, they're an artificer. They build automatons, because why would they pay people when they can build things to do the work for them. Automation. Now, next section is probably my favorite, and we're going to spend a lot of time on this video. Designing a menu for your tavern, I think, is so much fun, and you can really get lost in this. And you may be wondering how. You'll hopefully understand by the time you reach the end of this video how it's so easy to go down a rabbit hole when you start actually thinking about what types of foods a tavern would serve. So first thing, you need to explore the local culture, climate, geography of where this tavern is located to really figure out what types of foods would they have and all the different regional influences that would affect the dishes and the ingredients on the menu. Considered a desert region might feature cuisine that focuses on preserved foods or really hardy plants like cacti and spices that help preserve the food, and they would focus more on dishes that conserve water. You're not going to find a whole lot of like watery soups in a desert climate because water is a more precious commodity than that. You're going to find heartier dishes. It wouldn't make sense if you had a tavern on a tropical coast to be serving reindeer stew and root vegetables, whereas an Arctic tavern would be serving coconut milk and freshly caught fish. Freshly caught fish made with different types of fish, like freshly caught tropical fish, things like that. Those two culinary identities have been swapped, and they create a level of disconnect that can be confusing for somebody potentially. But it's a lot of fun to think about those things when you're creating a menu for your tavern. So really think about where your tavern is located. If it's in the Dwarven Mountains or an Elven Forest, that is going to have a direct effect on the type of food that they serve to their patrons. And then your player characters can riff off of that. If you have a dwarf who's used to these really hearty stews and potatoes and things like that, and they're being served a salad in an elven tavern, are they grumpy or are they intrigued by this odd new style of cuisine they've never encountered before? And on that front, and in a world like Eberron, this is very applicable, is a way to really set your taverns apart is think about how these cultural identities, these culinary identities, interact with each other when they come into contact. Sometimes these can be from positive interactions, like cultures trading with each other and establishing a positive relationship. Other times it can be a much more brutal affair, like colonization or conquest, that can cause these culinary identities to mix. But I think there are some really interesting stories that you can tell through your taverns and the menus that you create in how these interactions go. Let's say that you have a human coastal civilization that has established a positive trading relationship with merfolk that live in the water, and the dockside tavern that the players go to serves the sky and sea pie, which is a delicate flaky pastry crust filled with merfolk caught deep water fish and deep water vegetation, showing these two cultures coming together into a unique flavor that the humans may never get to experience, served in a vessel that the merfolk would never think to try and create. Because I'm not a pastry chef, but I imagine a flaky pastry pie crust would be difficult to accomplish underwater because it's wet and dark and cold. Additionally, you think about a dwarven mining kingdom that has expanded its reach out of the mountain range that is their home and into gnome territory. And the party goes to a gnome tavern that is in a region that has been annexed by this dwarven conquering force, and they find something on the menu called Stoneheart Soup, which incorporates all of the hardy root vegetables and fungi that the dwarves are accustomed to eating from their region and their home, but blended with the fresh spices and refreshing broth that the gnomes have cultivated through tending their gardens, and more the fresh agricultural society that they've built, showing that the gnomes have taken something from the invading force and made it their own into this new unique culinary invention. And then lastly, immigration. Immigration is a huge topic when it comes to culinary identity, and I think that you should explore that in your fantasy settings as well. How a family or a group of people going from one culture, geographical location, culinary identity to another. If you have tieflings that are from a barren, mountainous region of the world, and they go to an lush elven forest, what type of food are they going to be serving in the tavern that they start up? Because they're going to have the traditions of the hearty root vegetables, really gamey meats, bold, spicy flavors. But now they're coming into a culture where, A, they don't have access to all those ingredients, but they still have that culinary identity. So how do they take the ingredients that the elves have, fresh, leafy, green vegetables, fruits, forest-style mushrooms, those kind of things, how do they take those ingredients and still create something with their own cultural identity? Something like an infernal bounty salad where they take those leafy greens and things like that, but they create a dressing that is this bold, spicy flavor, the things that they could have reasonably brought with them from their homeland to still use here to bring their culinary identity to a new set of ingredients. You can see how you could just keep going and riffing with this kind of idea of crafting interesting menu items for your taverns. And then depending on the nature of your setting, you can start thinking about, okay, if there are a lot of adventurers traveling around and you have this tavern that's set on a main road for adventurers, what type of adventurer-friendly options would this tavern have? Obviously, they would have menu items to serve the locals, but what are they going to have to serve the traveling people that maybe only have a half hour to come in, have a couple drinks, plan their next job, and then they got to take off to the dungeon nearby? Start thinking about portable foods, foods that will last a long time, like jerkies or dried fruits, stuff like that. And how would the culinary identity of the people, what type of traveling food would they create? And if you want to get really fun and creative with it, you can even start bringing in mechanical bonuses to the food items that they serve for adventurers, knowing if you eat this fire belly stew, it gives you a temporary resistance to cold damage because you're just running so hot that not even a shard of ice hitting you, it just melts straight away. And the next step to really making the culinary identity of your tavern shine is the description and presentation of the food when it finally comes out. Spend some time looking at cookbook descriptions or even fine dining restaurant menus where they describe the dish, they describe the notes and the flavors that you can experience, because that will really give you a sense of how to describe food in a way that is evocative and enticing, rather than just saying the stew is tasty. You say the aromas wafting from the stew speak to the spicy peppers infused in the broth, mingling with the roasted meat that floats in the broth alongside the vibrantly orange carrots and the succulently fall apart potatoes that have blended together in a pot over hours and hours. It's better than just tasty. Or if you're in a Fey themed tavern or even a Fey run tavern, you can have Titiana's Trifle, a lovely layered dessert with gossamer thin pastry crust mixed with ethereal whipped cream and luminously vibrant berries. You get it. Just read menus that try to evoke this kind of language, and you'll start to understand how you can come up with these things on your own. And the same thing applies to beverages as well, but I wanted a separate section because beverages is where I tend to do a bit more of the how does magic influence the world. I like food to just be its own thing, like not necessarily infusing the magic of the world with the food, but I think you can really do fun things with the cocktails and ales and stuff like that in a fantasy tavern that can be really fun. Like a Phoenix Fire Ale that is an ale infused with fiery peppers to give it a spicy flavor, but also fire elemental magic that causes little sparks to shoot off the top of the beverage as the person drinks it. Harmless, of course, but still really cool on the presentation front. Or the Frost Giant's mead that comes in this giant tankard that seems like it's 128 ounces of this ice cold mead, but it's a trick of the eye to where as you drink it, it's actually just a normal 12-ounce ale. But the fun of it is as you drink it, the mug gets smaller and smaller so that by the time you finish drinking it, it's just a normal size ale. But you should also consider the cultural and culinary identity of the tavern when you're thinking about the types of drinks that they would serve as well. Obviously, dwarves are known for their stouts, their hearty, thick ales, whereas elves are more likely to find wine in their tavern and establishments. And this is dependent on the cultures of your setting. If your elves are actually the miners, then obviously they would have the stout ales, and the dwarves, if they are farmers and cultivating the land, they would have a lighter ale or a lager, something from the wheat that they are harvesting. But also it's very fun and interesting to have drinks that mark events in a region or world. Something that is a commemorative drink, something that speaks to the cultural identity or speaks to the cultural identity of somewhere else that culture is seeking to mock. If your world has a heated rivalry between elves and dwarves, what types of drinks would the dwarves have to make fun of the elves? What would they do to elven wine to mock the elves? And I'm thinking, of course, of drinks that we have here in America. I don't know how this drink resides in the rest of the world, except for obviously the place that it does not reside in, but something like the Irish Car Bomb, which is a Guinness with a shot of Bailey's dropped into it. That is something that may not be outright mocking, but certainly you should never order that drink in Ireland, based on what I've heard from Americans that have gone over there and tried to order that drink in Ireland. Why would you do that? Because it was a tragedy and actually, like, ugh. But yeah, just take something like that concept and apply it to your world. How would these cultures interact with each other and poke at each other through their drinks and their culinary identities? And as a bonus section here at the end of the video, because I literally just thought about this while I was recording the video and I typed it up really quick into the end of the script, how would versions of cultural foods present themselves in taverns outside of those cultures? What does a dwarven tavern look like run by elves in an elven forest? What does a gnome restaurant look like that is run by halflings? That just everything is off a little bit. It's an Italian going to Olive Garden kind of thing. Like, how would your dwarf react to going to a dwarven tavern run by humans? And what do they do? Why is there lettuce? We don't have lettuce. We didn't even know what lettuce was until we left the mines. What are they doing? Anyway, I hope that you found this video fun and informative. If you would like other tips on building out your world, check out the video right there.